The blizzard had been raging for 3 days when Katherine Rose stumbled through the knee-deep snow, her fingers so numb she could no longer feel them pressing against her chest. She had left Fort Riley with a stagecoach bound for Denver 2 weeks ago, never imagining that fate would strand her alone in the Kansas wilderness during the worst winter storm anyone could remember. The driver had lost control when the horses spooked at a rattlesnake den somehow exposed by the wind, and the coach had tumbled down an embankment. Catherine had climbed out of the wreckage with nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate will to survive, watching helplessly as the terrified horses disappeared into the white void with the overturned coach still attached. That had been yesterday morning, or perhaps the morning before. Time had become as meaningless as the horizon, both lost in the swirling white that seemed determined to erase her from existence. Catherine pushed forward because stopping meant death, but with each step, her body grew heavier, her thoughts slower. The teaching position waiting for her in Denver seemed like a dream from another lifetime. 23 years old, and already she had lost everything that mattered: her parents to cholera just 6 months ago, her childhood home sold to pay their debts, and now possibly her own life to this merciless storm. Her boot caught on something buried beneath the snow, and she went down hard, face first into the freezing powder. The cold burned her cheeks like fire. She tried to push herself up, but her arms would not cooperate. The wind howled around her, a sound like all the loneliness in the world given voice. Catherine thought about her mother's last words, about being brave, about making something of herself. She had tried. God knew she had tried. The snow began to feel almost warm. That was wrong. Some distant part of her mind insisted, but the rest of her just wanted to sleep. Just for a moment. Just to rest. She never heard the horse approaching through the storm, never felt the strong hands that rolled her over and brushed the snow from her blue-tinged face. When Mitchell James lifted her into his arms, Catherine's head lolled against his chest, her breathing so shallow he had to press his ear close to be certain she still lived. "Not today," he said into the wind, his voice rough with determination. "You are not dying today." Mitchell had been riding fence lines when the storm hit, checking on his scattered cattle before the worst of it arrived. He should have been back at his cabin hours ago, but one of his best breeding cows had gotten herself tangled in wire near the creek, and by the time he freed her and pointed her toward shelter, visibility had dropped to nothing. He had given his horse her head, trusting her to find the way home, when she had suddenly stopped and refused to move forward. He had almost missed Catherine entirely, just another snow-covered shape that might have been a fallen log or a boulder. But his mare had known, had somehow sensed the dying woman, and would not leave her behind. The cabin was 5 miles southwest, Mitchell knew, though in this storm it might as well have been 50. He settled Catherine across his saddle, then hauled himself up behind her, wrapping his heavy coat around them both as best he could. She was dangerously cold, her lips nearly purple, her skin like ice wherever he touched her. He could feel how thin she was, how her body trembled with violent shivers even in her unconscious state. Whatever circumstances had brought her to this God-forsaken stretch of wilderness, they clearly had not been kind. "Come on, Penny," he said to his mare, leaning low over Catherine's motionless form. "Take us home, girl. Take us home." The horse moved forward with careful determination, her head down against the wind, following instincts bred from generations of prairie horses who knew survival better than any human ever could. Mitchell held Catherine close, sharing what warmth his body could offer, talking to her even though she could not hear him, telling her stories about the cabin that waited ahead, about the fire he would build, about the hot soup and warm blankets and safety. Time ceased to have meaning. The world became nothing but white and cold, and the steady plodding of Penny's hooves through the deep drifts. Mitchell's arms ached from holding Catherine, from keeping her secure against the horse's movement and the wind's attempts to tear her away. He had built his cabin 3 years ago after leaving his family's ranch in Texas, seeking solitude and a fresh start after the war had taken his 2 brothers and his faith in humanity. He had chosen this remote stretch of Kansas specifically because it was far from everything, because he could go weeks without seeing another soul. Now, holding this frozen woman against his chest, that isolation felt like both a curse and a blessing. A curse because she needed help he might not be able to give, a blessing because at least she had stumbled into his path rather than dying alone in the endless white. The storm showed no signs of easing. If anything, it seemed to grow more ferocious, as if angry that he had stolen its prize. Snow pelted them horizontally, each flake a tiny knife against exposed skin. Mitchell's face went numb, then his hands, though he never loosened his grip on Catherine. Penny stumbled once, then again, and Mitchell's heart clenched with fear that they might all go down together. But the mare recovered, shook her head fiercely, and pushed on. "That's my girl," Mitchell said, though his voice came out as barely a whisper. "Just a little further now. Just a little further." He was not sure he believed his own words. They might have been traveling in circles for all he knew. He might have led them all to death through his stubborn refusal to stop, to find whatever shelter the prairie might offer and wait out the worst of it. But Catherine needed warmth now, needed it desperately, and only his cabin could provide that. Then, like a miracle emerging from the whiteout, Mitchell saw the dark shape of his barn. Relief hit him so hard it was almost painful. Penny quickened her pace, sensing safety, and moments later they were in the blessed stillness of the barn's interior, the wind's howl suddenly muted to something almost peaceful. Mitchell slid from the saddle carefully. Catherine still held tight against him. She had not stirred once during the entire journey, and that terrified him more than he wanted to admit. He needed to get her inside, needed to start warming her immediately, but he also could not leave Penny unsheltered after she had saved all their lives. Working one-handed while keeping Catherine supported against his shoulder, Mitchell removed the saddle and rubbed Penny down with a handful of straw, talking to her softly, thanking her over and over. He made sure she had hay and water, though his movements were clumsy with urgency and exhaustion. The mare seemed to understand, standing patiently while he worked, occasionally turning her head to look at the unconscious woman with something that seemed remarkably like concern. Finally, Mitchell lifted Catherine fully into his arms again and shouldered his way out of the barn, into the short stretch of yard between it and his cabin. The wind hit them like a physical blow, but he bent his head and pushed through it, climbing the 3 steps to his porch, fumbling with the latch and finally stumbling inside. The cabin was dark and bitterly cold, the fire having died hours ago, but it was shelter. Mitchell kicked the door shut behind them and carried Catherine to his bed, laying her down on the thick quilts his mother had made him before he left Texas. She looked impossibly small and fragile against the rough wool, her face still that terrible blue-white color, her damp hair already freezing into icy strands around her face. Mitchell moved with the efficiency of a man who had lived alone long enough to know every inch of his domain. He lit the lamp with shaking hands, then immediately set about building up the fire, cramming the stove full of wood and kindling. The flames caught quickly, and he opened the damper wide, letting heat pour into the room. Only when he felt the first waves of warmth did he return to Catherine. Her clothes were soaked through, freezing against her skin. Mitchell hesitated for only a moment before beginning to remove them, working quickly and clinically, telling himself this was about survival and nothing more. He had seen enough death during the war to know what happened to bodies exposed to extreme cold. If he left her in these wet things, she would die. It was that simple. He stripped her down to her chemise and drawers, both of which were also damp but not frozen, and wrapped her in every blanket he owned. Her skin felt like marble beneath his fingers, smooth and cold and lifeless. He chafed her hands between his, then her feet, trying to stimulate circulation, trying to bring blood back to her extremities. She needed to warm slowly, he knew. Too fast, and it would be as dangerous as the cold itself. Mitchell hung her clothes near the stove to dry, trying not to think about the fine quality of the fabric, the careful stitching. This was no prairie woman accustomed to hardship. The cut of her dress spoke of eastern cities, of money and education. What was someone like her doing alone in the Kansas wilderness during a blizzard? He filled a pot with snow from outside and set it on the stove to melt, then dug through his supplies for the beef broth he had made just last week. She would need liquid when she woke. If she woke, Mitchell shoved that thought aside. She would wake. He had not carried her 5 miles through a blizzard, only to watch her slip away in the warmth of his cabin. The fire roared now, making the small space almost uncomfortably hot, but Mitchell did not adjust it. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, watching Catherine's face for any sign of consciousness, any hint of improvement. Her shivering had increased, which he took as a good sign. Shivering meant her body was fighting, was trying to warm itself. Hours passed. Mitchell melted snow and spooned tiny amounts of water between Catherine's lips, relieved when her throat worked reflexively to swallow. He kept the fire burning hot, kept watch over her still form, and waited. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside his cabin, in the circle of warmth and lamplight, Mitchell found himself praying for the first time since the war ended. Not the desperate prayers of a soldier in battle, but something quieter, more personal. A simple plea that this unknown woman might live, that his 5 mile journey through hell might mean something. Dawn came eventually, though the storm made it barely noticeable, a slight lightening of the darkness outside the cabin's single window. Mitchell had dozed in his chair, starting awake at every small sound, constantly checking to make sure Catherine still breathed. She had more color now, he thought. The terrible blue tinge had faded from her lips, and her face looked merely pale rather than deathly. He was changing out the blankets, replacing ones that had grown damp from her slowly thawing clothes with dry ones, when her eyes fluttered open. For a moment, she simply stared at the ceiling, her expression confused, and then her gaze found him and went wide with alarm. "Easy," Mitchell said softly, holding his hands up in a gesture of peace. "You are safe. You collapsed in the snow, and I brought you here." Catherine tried to speak, but her voice came out as a croak. Mitchell quickly poured water into a tin cup and held it to her lips, supporting her head while she drank. She managed a few small sips before pulling away, her eyes never leaving his face. "Where am I?" she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "My cabin, about 15 miles northwest of Linden, Kansas. I am Mitchell James. Found you near frozen to death yesterday during the storm." He watched understanding dawn in her eyes, watched her process the information and glanced down at herself, at the blankets, and her state of undress. Color flooded her cheeks, but to her credit, she did not panic. "My clothes? We're soaking wet and freezing to your skin. They are drying by the stove. I left your undergarments. You would have died otherwise." Catherine nodded slowly, and Mitchell saw her trying to piece together what had happened, how she had ended up here. Tears suddenly welled in her eyes, and she turned her face away, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Mitchell felt helpless in the face of her distress. He was not good with emotion, had spent 3 years in isolation specifically to avoid having to deal with other people's feelings. But something about this woman's quiet crying affected him in a way he had not expected. He found himself reaching out, placing an awkward hand on her shoulder through the layers of blankets. "You are alive," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "Whatever happened, whatever brought you out into that storm, you survived it. The rest we can figure out." Catherine drew in a shuddering breath and turned back to face him. Her eyes were a startling green, he noticed, made even more vivid by the tears. She was beautiful, he realized with a strange jolt. Even exhausted and emotionally overwrought, even with her hair a tangled mess and her face still drawn from her ordeal, she was beautiful. "The stagecoach," she said. It overturned. The driver, he was thrown. I think he might have broken his neck. There was another passenger, an older woman, but she was already dead when I climbed out. I tried to stay with the coach, but it was caught in some rocks at the bottom of an embankment. The horses had run off with it still attached, and I could not reach the supplies. I thought if I just started walking, I might find help. How long were you out there? A day, I think? Maybe longer. I lost track of time. Mitchell nodded, impressed despite himself. A full day in that storm with no shelter, no food, inadequate clothing. Most people would have died in half that time. You are stronger than you look, he said, and was rewarded with a tiny, watery smile. I do not feel very strong right now. Strength is not always about how you feel. Sometimes it is just about putting one foot in front of the other until you can't anymore. You did that. You survived. Katherine was quiet for a moment, her eyes searching his face. You carried me here? 5 miles, more or less. My horse did most of the work. 5 miles in that storm. She shook her head slowly. You saved my life. Mitchell felt uncomfortable with her gratitude, with the weight of it. Anyone would have done the same. I doubt that is true, but thank you regardless. I am Katherine Rose. I was traveling to Denver to take a teaching position. Well, Miss Rose, I am afraid you are going to be stuck here for a while. That storm is not going to blow itself out anytime soon, and even when it does, the snow will be too deep for safe travel. Could be days, could be a week or more. He watched her absorb this information, saw her glance around the small cabin with barely concealed apprehension. He tried to see it through her eyes. The single room with its rough-hewn walls, the narrow bed, the sparse furnishings, a table with 2 chairs, a stove, shelves holding supplies, his rifle mounted over the door. It was clean and well-maintained, but undeniably crude, the home of a man who had turned his back on civilization. I will make a pallet by the fire, he said quickly. You keep the bed. I have slept in worse places. I cannot take your bed. You have already done so much. You nearly froze to death. Your body needs rest and warmth. The bed is yours while you are here. No arguments. Katherine looked like she wanted to protest further, but another wave of exhaustion seemed to wash over her, and she simply nodded. Mitchell stood and busied himself with heating the broth, giving her privacy to process everything that had happened. When he turned back, he found her watching him with an expression he could not quite read. Are you hungry? He asked. Yes, actually. Very. He helped her sit up, propping her against the wall with pillows, and handed her a bowl of the hot broth. She wrapped her hands around it gratefully, breathing in the steam before taking a careful sip. Mitchell watched her drink, noting the dark circles under her eyes, the way her hands still trembled slightly. What were you doing out in this storm? Katherine asked after a while. When you found me, I mean. Checking fence lines, making sure my cattle were not in trouble. Storm came on faster and harder than expected. I was on my way back when my horse stopped and would not move. That is when I saw you. Your horse stopped. Penny. She is the real hero in all this. I might have ridden right past you if she had not insisted on stopping. Katherine smiled at that. A real smile this time, and Mitchell felt something shift in his chest. Then I owe both of you my life. They fell into a comfortable silence while Katherine finished her broth. Outside, the wind continued its relentless assault on the cabin, rattling the window in its frame, finding every tiny crack and gap to whistle through. But inside, the stove radiated warmth, and the lamp cast a golden glow over everything, creating a sense of safety, of sanctuary from the storm's fury. You should rest, Mitchell said when Katherine's eyes began to droop. Your body has been through a terrible ordeal. Sleep is the best medicine now. Katherine did not argue this time. She handed him the empty bowl and slid back down beneath the blankets, her eyes already closing. Mitchell watched her drift off, her breathing gradually evening out into the deep rhythm of sleep. Only when he was certain she was truly resting did he allow himself to relax slightly. He had not been entirely truthful when he told Katherine she would be stuck here for a while. The truth was, he had no idea when it would be safe to travel, when the storm would end, or how much snow would fall before it did. They might be trapped together for days or even weeks. The thought should have troubled him more than it did. He had chosen isolation deliberately, had built his life around solitude and silence. Now that solitude had been shattered by circumstance and the unconscious woman currently occupying his bed. And yet, watching Catherine sleep, Mitchell found he did not mind as much as he should have. Perhaps it was simply the satisfaction of having saved a life, of having made his lonely journey through the blizzard mean something. Or perhaps it was something else, something he was not quite ready to examine too closely. He shook his head at his own foolishness and set about making coffee, the strong, bitter brew that had kept him going through countless cold mornings. Outside, the storm howled on, showing no signs of weakening. Mitchell settled into his chair with his coffee and prepared to wait, to keep watch over his unexpected guest and see what the next days might bring. The storm raged for 3 more days. During that time, Mitchell and Catherine fell into a strange sort of routine. She regained her strength gradually, moving from the bed to sit by the fire, then helping with small tasks around the cabin. Her clothes had dried, and she wore them during the day, though Mitchell noticed she had to wrap a blanket around her shoulders for additional warmth. His cabin was built for one person who did not mind the cold, not for someone accustomed to city comforts. They talked in fits and starts, sharing pieces of their stories. Catherine told him about her parents' deaths, about selling everything to pay debts, and accepting the teaching position in Denver as her only real option. "I had never been west of St. Louis," she admitted one evening, while they ate the rabbit stew Mitchell had made from preserved meat. "I thought I was prepared for frontier life, but I had no idea what that really meant." Mitchell, in turn, told her about his brothers, both killed at Shiloh while he survived with nothing but a scar on his shoulder and memories that woke him sweating in the night. He told her about his family's ranch in Texas, about his parents who had died within a year of each other after the war ended, both of them simply giving up without their sons around to give them purpose. He did not tell her about the way he had fled north to Kansas afterward, unable to stay in a place haunted by so much loss, unable to be the son his parents needed when his own soul felt hollow. But Catherine seemed to understand anyway. She had a way of listening that made talking easier. Her green eyes focused completely on him, never judging, simply absorbing. Mitchell found himself saying things he had not said aloud in years, sharing thoughts he had barely acknowledged to himself. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke. Mitchell woke to silence so profound it was almost frightening after days of constant wind. He rose from his pallet by the fire and crossed to the window, pulling back the cloth he had hung for insulation. What he saw made his breath catch. Snow everywhere. Drifts reaching halfway up the barn's walls. The entire landscape transformed into an unbroken expanse of white that reflected the dawn light with blinding intensity. It was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. "How bad is it?" Catherine's voice came from the bed, still thick with sleep. "Bad. Going to be at least a week before the main trails are passable. Maybe longer." He heard her sigh behind him, but could not tell if it was relief or disappointment. Truth be told, he was not certain himself what he felt. Part of him knew he should be anxious to get Catherine to Linden, to the sheriff there who could arrange for her continued travel to Denver. But another part, a part he was trying very hard not to acknowledge, was in no hurry to see her leave. "I should check on Penny," Mitchell said, turning from the window. "Make sure the barn held up." "I will start breakfast," Catherine offered, already pushing back the blankets. They moved around each other with increasing ease, Catherine tending the fire and starting coffee, while Mitchell bundled up to face the cold. The snow came up past his knees in places, higher where it had drifted. He had to dig his way to the barn door, but once inside, he found Penny perfectly content, the structure having weathered the storm without issue. "Morning, girl," he said softly, running his hand down her neck. "Thanks to you, she is going to be just fine. We both are." The mare nickered and bumped her nose against his chest, and Mitchell smiled. He had bought Penny 3 years ago from a farmer near Fort Leavenworth, and she had proven herself worth 10 times what he paid. Smart, steady, and with an uncanny sense for danger. He made sure she had fresh hay and water, then fought his way back through the snow to the cabin. Catherine had breakfast ready when he came in, stamping snow from his boots. Just beans and cornbread, the same simple fare he had been eating for months, but she had somehow made it seem more appealing, arranging it on plates instead of eating straight from the pot the way he usually did. "Thank you," he said, genuinely touched by the small effort. "It is the least I can do considering you saved my life and are now stuck with me indefinitely." "You are not a burden, Catherine." She looked up at him, something shifting in her expression. It was the first time he had used her given name, he realized. It had slipped out naturally without thought. "Catherine?" she said softly. "Is that inappropriate? I can call you Miss Rose if you prefer." "No, I like it. It has just been a while since anyone called me by my first name. After my parents died, everyone was very formal. Even my friends treated me differently once I was orphaned and penniless." Mitchell felt a flash of anger on her behalf. He knew something about being treated differently, about watching people's eyes change when they looked at you. After the war, after he came home without his brothers, the pity and awkwardness had been suffocating. "Well, I am not good at formal," he said. "So Catherine it is, if that sits right with you." "It does, and please call me Kate. My mother used to call me that. Kate." He tested the name, liked the way it felt. "Suits you better anyway." They ate in companionable silence, and afterward, Mitchell taught Kate how to card the wool he had traded for last fall. She proved a quick study, her fingers nimble despite the healing frostbite on her fingertips. They worked side by side through the morning, Mitchell mending tack while Kate carded, the cabin warm and peaceful. "Tell me about your ranch," Kate said after a while. "The one you plan to build here." Mitchell was surprised she remembered. He had mentioned it only once, late one evening when exhaustion had loosened his tongue. "How did you know I planned to expand? You talk about your cattle with ambition in your voice, and you have more supplies here than one man needs just to survive. You are building towards something." She was perceptive, Mitchell thought. Too perceptive, perhaps. "I have 20 head now," he said. "Good breeding stock. In 5 years, if I am careful and lucky, I could have 100. In 10, maybe 500. This land is perfect for cattle. Good grass, water from the creek, shelter in the hills. Just needs someone willing to work for it." "That sounds lonely." "I prefer lonely." "Do you?" Kate asked, and there was something in her tone that made him look up. "Or is it just easier than risking caring about people again?" The question hit harder than it should have. Mitchell felt his jaw tighten. "I manage fine on my own." "I am sure you do, but managing is not the same as living. You do not know anything about my life." "You are right, I do not. I am sorry. That was presumptuous of me." Kate returned her attention to the wool. Her cheeks flushed, and Mitchell felt immediately guilty for his sharp tone. She had touched something raw, something true, and he had lashed out instinctively. The silence stretched between them, no longer comfortable but strained. "My youngest brother was 19 when he died," Mitchell said finally. "Barely old enough to shave, but he insisted on enlisting with our older brother. I was supposed to keep them safe. That was my job. I was the oldest, the one with experience. But when the fighting started, when everything went to chaos, I lost track of them. Found them both after it was over, lying in the mud not 10 feet from each other. I carried them both off that battlefield. Carried them for miles until I found someone who could give them a proper burial." He felt Kate's hand on his arm, light as a bird landing. "That is why you carried me. Why you refused to give up. Maybe? I do not know. I just knew I could not watch someone else die if there was anything I could do to prevent it." "You are a good man." "Mitchell James. I am a man who ran away from everything he ever knew because he could not stand to be there without his brothers. You are a man who survived and tried to build something new. There is no shame in that." Mitchell finally met her eyes and found nothing but understanding there. No pity, no judgment. Something eased in his chest, some tightness he had been carrying for so long he had forgotten it was there. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Mitchell worked on projects around the cabin and barn, fixing things that had needed attention for months. Kate helped where she could and spent time reading from the two books Mitchell owned, a worn Bible and a collection of Shakespeare's plays that had belonged to his brother. They cooked together, ate together, talked about everything and nothing. The isolation that had once felt like protection began to feel more like a cocoon, a temporary space outside the normal world where two damaged people could catch their breath and remember what it felt like to not be alone. Mitchell found himself watching Kate when she was not looking, noticing small things. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, the soft humming under her breath when she thought he could not hear, the grace in her movements despite the crude surroundings. She was adapting to frontier life better than she probably realized, never complaining about the cold or the monotony or the lack of privacy. He caught her watching him too sometimes. Their eyes would meet across the cabin, and something would pass between them, something neither of them was quite ready to name. The air felt charged in those moments, full of possibility and danger in equal measure. A week after the storm ended, Mitchell decided they needed to dig out a path to the root cellar he had built into the hillside behind the cabin. The snow had finally settled enough to make such work possible, though it would still be brutal. He expected Kate to stay inside where it was warm, but she bundled up in his spare coat and followed him out without being asked. They worked together, shoveling the heavy wet snow, creating a narrow trench toward the cellar door. It was hard, exhausting labor, but Kate never flagged, never suggested they stop and rest. Mitchell found himself admiring her determination, her refusal to be treated as fragile, despite everything she had been through. "You would have made a good frontier wife," he said without thinking, then immediately wished he could take the words back. Kate paused in her shoveling, her cheeks flushed from exertion and cold. "Would have? I just mean you are tougher than you look. Most Eastern women would not last a day out here. I nearly did not last a day out here. But you fought. That is what matters." Kate leaned on her shovel, studying him with that disconcertingly direct gaze. "What happened to make you so determined to be alone, Mitchell?" "Really?" He wanted to deflect, to change the subject the way he always did when conversations got too personal. But something about Kate, about the way she looked at him like she actually cared about the answer, made him reconsider. "After the war, after my parents died, I tried to stay on the ranch, tried to keep it running the way my father would have wanted. But everywhere I looked, I saw ghosts. My brothers in the barn, at the dinner table, riding the fence lines. I could not escape them, could not breathe for the weight of their absence. One morning I woke up and knew if I stayed another day, I would lose my mind. So I sold everything, packed what would fit in a wagon, and headed north. Ended up here because the land was cheap and empty and about as far from Texas as I could get while still staying in country I understood. Do you regret it?" "Sometimes. Mostly I just feel numb, like I am waiting for something to matter again." Kate was quiet for a long moment, her breath making clouds in the cold air. "I understand that feeling. After my parents died, after I sold the house and said goodbye to everyone I knew, I felt like I was walking through a dream. Nothing seemed quite real. The stagecoach, Denver, the teaching position, all of it felt like something happening to someone else. And now I am standing in knee-deep snow in Kansas, talking to a cowboy who saved my life, and for the first time in months, I feel present, like this is actually real and I am actually here experiencing it." Mitchell held her gaze, his heart beating harder than the physical exertion warranted. "I am glad you are here, Kate. I know the circumstances were terrible, but I am glad." "I am glad, too." They stood there in the cold, the shovels forgotten, something unspoken passing between them. Mitchell wanted to close the distance between them, wanted to brush the snow from her hair and see if her lips were as soft as they looked, but he held back, uncertain, afraid of ruining whatever this fragile thing was that had grown between them. Kate broke the moment first, returning to her shoveling with renewed vigor. Mitchell followed suit, and they worked in silence until they finally broke through to the cellar door. Inside, Mitchell's stores of food remained intact: potatoes and carrots and turnips, dried beans and flour, preserved meat and fruit, enough to see them through the rest of winter easily. That evening, Kate made a stew with fresh vegetables, and it tasted better than anything Mitchell remembered eating in years. They ate by lamplight, the wind picking up outside as another storm threatened, though nothing like the blizzard that had brought Kate to him. "Do you think the trail to Linden will be passable soon?" Kate asked, and Mitchell heard the reluctance in her voice. "Maybe another week. Depends on whether we get more snow. And then I suppose I should arrange to continue to Denver. The school is probably wondering what happened to me." "Probably." Mitchell pushed food around his plate, his appetite suddenly gone. "Though they might have hired someone else by now. Storm like that, people missing. They would not wait forever." "No, I suppose not." "You could stay," Mitchell said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "Here, I mean, at least until spring. Travel would be safer then." Kate looked up, surprise clear on her face. "Stay here? In your cabin? I know it is not proper, but proper went out the window when I pulled you out of that snow. And it is not safe for a woman to travel alone, even in good conditions. At least here you would have shelter and protection while you figured out what you wanted to do next." "What I wanted to do?" "The teaching position was your only option when you had nothing. But maybe now you have other choices. Time to think about them at least." Kate was quiet for so long, Mitchell thought she was formulating a polite way to refuse. Then she said, "What would people say? A single woman living alone with a single man." "There are no people. The nearest neighbor is 12 miles away, and I see him maybe twice a year. As for Linden, we could say you are my cousin, widowed and needing a place to recover. Nobody would question it. You have thought about this." "I have thought about nothing else for 3 days," Mitchell admitted. "I know I have no right to ask. You do not owe me anything just because I happened to find you in the snow. But the truth is, Kate, these past weeks having you here, they have been the best weeks I have had in 3 years. You make the silence feel less heavy. You make this cabin feel like a home instead of just a place to sleep. And I would like you to stay if you were willing." Kate's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I do not have anything to offer you. No money, no skills beyond teaching. I would be a burden." "You would not. You pull your weight around here. Anyone can see that. And as for money, I do not need it. I have enough to see us through winter, and the ranch will provide after that." "Us," Kate repeated softly. "You say that like we are a partnership. We could be, if you wanted." Kate stood abruptly and moved to the window, staring out at the darkness. Mitchell watched her, his heart in his throat, terrified he had pushed too far, asked too much. But when she turned back, there was a smile on her face. "Yes," she said simply. "I would like to stay." Relief flooded through Mitchell so powerfully he felt lightheaded. He stood and crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "You will not regret it, I promise." "I know I will not." They stood close, hands joined, and Mitchell felt the last of his carefully maintained distance crumble. Kate was not running away. She was choosing to stay, choosing him, choosing this rough frontier life over the security Denver might have offered. He lifted one hand to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone, and Kate leaned into the touch. "I am going to kiss you now," Mitchell said, giving her every opportunity to pull away. "If that is all right with you." "It is more than all right." Mitchell closed the small distance between them and pressed his lips to Kate's. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, two people learning the shape and feel of each other. But then Kate's arms came up around his neck, and the kiss deepened, became something more urgent, more necessary. Mitchell pulled her closer, one hand tangling in her hair, the other at the small of her back, and Kate responded with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Mitchell rested his forehead against Kate's. I think I have been waiting to do that since the moment you opened your eyes in my bed. I think I have been waiting for you to do that since the moment I realized I did not want to leave. They kissed again, slower this time, savoring it. Outside, the wind howled, and snow began to fall once more. But inside the cabin, wrapped in each other's arms, Mitchell and Kate had found their own shelter from the storm. The weeks that followed were both wonderful and challenging. Mitchell and Kate navigated their new relationship carefully, aware that they were still learning each other, still building trust. Mitchell insisted Kate continue to take the bed while he slept by the fire, despite her protests. We will do this properly, he said firmly. When we marry, and we will marry, if you will have me, I want to know I did right by you. Kate had laughed at his old-fashioned notions, but agreed. They stole kisses throughout the day, held hands while walking through the snow to check on Penny, sat close by the fire in the evenings while reading aloud to each other. It was a simple courtship, shaped by isolation and frontier necessity, but it felt right to both of them. As winter grudgingly gave way to early spring, Mitchell made the journey into Linden to collect supplies and check on the state of the trails. He returned with news that the stagecoach accident had been reported, that Kate was listed among those presumed dead. She stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching him approach, and something about the set of his shoulders told her the news before he said a word. They think I am dead, she said as he dismounted. Yes, the driver's body was found, and the other passengers. They searched but never found you. Figured you had wandered off and frozen somewhere. Kate nodded slowly, processing this. So I could go to Denver. Tell them who I am. You could. Mitchell tied Penny to the porch rail and climbed the steps to stand in front of Kate. Or you could stay dead and start over here. Become Kate James instead of Katherine Rose. Build a life with me on this land. That is highly irregular. I do not give a damn about regular. I care about you, Kate. I love you. I have loved you since you smiled at me over that first bowl of broth. Maybe even before that, when I was carrying you through the storm and you felt like the most precious thing in the world. So yes, it is irregular and improper and probably scandalous if anyone ever found out. But I am asking anyway. Will you marry me? Kate's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Yes. Yes, I will marry you. Mitchell swept her into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, not caring that they were in full view of the prairie. We will go back to Linden tomorrow, he said when they came up for air. Find a preacher. Make this official. Tomorrow, Kate agreed, then pulled him back down for another kiss. They were married 2 days later in Linden's small church, with the sheriff and his wife serving as witnesses. Mitchell bought Kate a simple gold band in the general store, and she wore a new dress of dark blue wool that made her eyes look like emeralds. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Mitchell kissed his bride with enough enthusiasm to make the sheriff's wife giggle and the preacher clear his throat. The ride back to the cabin felt different now. Kate sat close to Mitchell on the wagon seat, his arm around her shoulders, and she felt something settle deep in her chest. This was home now, not Denver or St. Louis or anywhere else. This rough cabin in the Kansas wilderness with this quiet, strong man beside her. Home. Their wedding night was tender and sweet. Mitchell's earlier determination to do things properly replaced by gentle exploration and growing passion. Afterward, lying tangled together in the bed that was now theirs, Kate traced the scar on Mitchell's shoulder and thought about all the twisting paths that had led them both to this moment. Do you ever regret it? Mitchell asked quietly. Giving up teaching, the city life you might have had? Not for a second. Do you regret finding me in the snow? Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. You gave me a reason to live instead of just surviving. Kate kissed him softly. We will build something good here. I can feel it. We already have. Spring arrived in earnest, bringing with it the hard work of a working ranch. Kate proved herself every bit as capable as Mitchell had believed, learning to help with the cattle, to ride Penny when Mitchell needed to work on foot, to manage the garden she planted near the cabin. She was not a natural frontierswoman, but she was determined, and that counted for more than natural talent. By summer, Kate's transformation was complete. Her hands were calloused from work, her skin sun-kissed, her body stronger from the physical labor. She had learned to shoot Mitchell's rifle, to dress game, to preserve food for the coming winter. But she never lost the spark that had first drawn Mitchell to her, that sharp intelligence and quick wit that made every day interesting. They talked about everything as they worked side by side. Kate told stories about her childhood in Boston, about her father's bookshop and her mother's garden. Mitchell shared memories of his brothers that had once been too painful to speak aloud. They made plans for the ranch, for adding more cattle next year, for building a bigger barn, maybe even a proper house someday with multiple rooms and glass windows. "I want children," Kate said one evening in late summer. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. "Is that something you want too?" Mitchell pulled her closer against his side. "I want everything with you. Children, grandchildren, growing old together in that bigger house we are always planning. All of it." "Good, because I think we might be starting on that sooner rather than later." Mitchell went very still. "Kate, are you saying what I think you are saying?" She smiled and placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "I am saying you are going to be a father, Mitchell James." The joy that flooded Mitchell's face made Kate's heart swell. He gathered her into his arms, holding her like she was something infinitely precious and fragile. "I am going to be a father," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby. We are." That night, lying in bed with Kate's head on his chest, Mitchell thought about the journey that had brought them here, the loss and pain that had driven him north to Kansas, the storm that had nearly killed Kate but instead delivered her into his path, the 5 miles he had carried her through the blizzard, every step a prayer that she would live. None of it had been part of any plan, but somehow it had all led to this moment, this perfect, unexpected life they were building together. Kate gave birth the following spring during a warm spell that seemed sent by Providence. The labor was long and difficult, with only Mitchell to help her through it, but when their son finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Kate held him to her chest and wept with joy. "He looks like you," she said, exhausted but radiant. Mitchell stared down at his son, his child, and felt his throat tighten with emotion. "He is perfect. What should we call him?" Kate did not hesitate. "Matthew, after your youngest brother, if that sits right with you." Mitchell had to turn away for a moment, overcome. When he looked back, there were tears on his face. "That sits more than right. Matthew James, he would have liked that." Little Matthew thrived in the frontier environment, growing strong and healthy on his mother's milk and his parents' abundant love. As he grew from infant to toddler, Mitchell and Kate found their rhythm as parents, taking turns walking him when he cried, celebrating his first steps, his first words. The cabin that had once held only Mitchell's lonely silence now rang with laughter and life. 2 years after Matthew's birth, Kate gave birth again, this time to a daughter they named Mary. She had Kate's green eyes and Mitchell's dark hair, and she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from the moment she drew breath. Mitchell, who had once been so certain he wanted only isolation, now found his greatest joy in teaching his children to ride, to recognize cattle brands, to appreciate the vast beauty of the prairie that was their home. The ranch grew as the children did. Mitchell's careful breeding program paid off, and within 5 years of Matthew's birth, they had the 100 head he had once dreamed of. They hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, young men from Linden who slept in the barn and ate meals with the family. The cabin became too small, and Mitchell spent 2 summers building a proper house, a two-story structure with 4 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a front porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Kate watched the house take shape with satisfaction. This was what they had built together, she and Mitchell. Not just the physical structure, but the life it represented. Love born from hardship, tested by isolation, and strengthened by shared purpose. She thought sometimes about that desperate woman stumbling through the blizzard, convinced she would die alone in the snow. That woman felt like someone else now, someone from a different life. Katherine Rose had died in that storm, and Kate James had been born in the warmth of a cowboy's cabin. On their 10th anniversary, Mitchell surprised Kate with a trip to Linden. They left the children with the ranch hands and rode to town together, something they rarely did anymore. He took her to dinner at the new hotel, a fancy affair by frontier standards, and afterward they walked through the streets as evening fell. "Do you ever miss it?" Mitchell asked, gesturing vaguely eastward. "The city, the life you might have had?" Kate stopped and turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. "Mitchell James, I have told you 1,000 times, and I will tell you 1,000 more. You and our children, our ranch, this life we have built together, it is everything I never knew I wanted. I do not miss what might have been, because what is so much better than anything I could have imagined." Mitchell pulled her close and kissed her there on the street, not caring who might see. "I love you, Kate, more now than even on the day I married you. That is good, because you are stuck with me for at least another 40 or 50 years. Only 40 or 50. I was hoping for longer than that." Kate laughed and let her husband lead her back toward their wagon. The stars were coming out overhead, brilliant in the clear Kansas sky, and somewhere to the west, in a sturdy house surrounded by good land and thriving cattle, their children were waiting for them to come home. As they rode back in the darkness, Kate found herself thinking about providence and fate. She had not believed in either before the blizzard, had thought life was simply a series of random events without pattern or purpose. But how else could she explain the storm that had brought her to Mitchell's path? The mare who had refused to move until her rider found the dying woman in the snow? The 5 miles Mitchell had carried her, refusing to give up even when it would have been easier to let her go? "What are you thinking about?" Mitchell asked, always attuned to her moods. "About how lucky I am, how lucky we are. Luck had nothing to do with it. You fought to survive. I refused to let you die. We chose each other, and we worked to build something good. That is not luck, Kate. That is will and love and stubbornness. Maybe, but I am grateful for it anyway. For all of it, even the hard parts that brought us here." Mitchell's arm tightened around her. "Me too. Every day, me too." They arrived back at the ranch to find Matthew had let the chickens out of their coop. Mary had convinced one of the ranch hands to let her stay up late, and general chaos reigned. But it was the good kind of chaos, the kind that came from a house full of life and love. Mitchell and Kate dealt with the children, got them settled into bed, and finally found themselves alone in their own room. "Another successful anniversary," Kate said, brushing out her hair by lamplight. Mitchell came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. In the mirror, they looked at each other, no longer young but not yet old, both bearing the marks of years spent working under the prairie sun. They were partners in every sense of the word, bound together by more than just vows and children. They were bound by shared experience, by the knowledge that they had each saved the other in ways that went beyond physical rescue. "Best 10 years of my life," Mitchell said softly. "Mine too. Think you can stand 40 more of me?" "I think I can manage." Kate turned in his arms and kissed him, and outside their window, the prairie stretched away in all directions, vast and empty and beautiful under the star-filled sky. This was their kingdom, their refuge, their home. And it had all begun with a storm, a dying woman, and a cowboy who refused to give up. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythm of seasons and the growing up of children. Matthew became a serious young man who took after his father in both temperament and skill with cattle. He learned to rope and brand before he was 10, and by 12, he could outride most grown men. Mary, meanwhile, inherited her mother's sharp mind and love of learning. Kate taught her to read from the small library they had accumulated, and Mary devoured every book she could get her hands on. When Matthew was 15 and Mary 13, Kate gave birth to twins, a surprise that left both parents feeling simultaneously blessed and exhausted. James and Julia arrived on a blustery October evening, and suddenly the house that had seemed so spacious felt rather crowded. But it was a good kind of crowded, full of noise and life and constant motion. Mitchell, now in his mid-40s, found himself reflecting on how much his life had changed since that long-ago blizzard. The angry, grief-stricken man who had fled Texas, seeking only isolation, no longer existed. In his place was someone comfortable in his own skin, someone who had learned that opening himself to love did not guarantee loss, that building something with another person could heal even the deepest wounds. One evening, sitting on their porch while the twins played in the yard under Mary's watchful eye, Mitchell turned to Kate. "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" "For not giving up in that storm, for fighting to survive long enough for me to find you. If you had stopped even 5 minutes earlier, I would have ridden right past." Kate reached over and took his hand. "And I never thanked you for seeing me when you could have so easily missed me, for caring enough to carry me 5 miles through a blizzard when letting me go would have been simpler, for building this life with me. I think we can call it even. I think we can." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children, counting their blessings. The ranch now boasted over 300 head of cattle, making them one of the more prosperous operations in the county. They had good neighbors, though still few and far between, and a reputation for fair dealing and hard work. Their older children would inherit a thriving concern, a piece of land that they had helped build from nothing. But more than the material success, Mitchell and Kate had built something more precious. A family bound not just by blood, but by love and respect and shared values. They had created a home where laughter was common and affection freely given, where work was valued, but so was rest, where honesty mattered more than pride. As the sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds, Kate leaned her head on Mitchell's shoulder. "Tell me again about the night you found me." Mitchell smiled. Kate asked him to tell this story at least once a year, always saying she wanted to remember every detail, wanted to keep that night fresh in her memory. "It was the worst storm I had ever seen," he began, his voice falling into the familiar rhythm of a tale told many times. "Wind so strong I could barely stay in the saddle. I had given Penny her head, trusted her to get us home. Then suddenly she stopped, refused to move no matter what I did. I almost forced her onward, but something made me pause, made me look around. And there you were, just a shape in the snow that I almost took for a fallen log. But when I got closer, I saw your hair, dark against the white, and your hand reaching up like you were trying to grab onto something. In that moment, looking down at you, I knew my life was about to change. I did not know how or why, but I knew nothing would ever be the same." "And were you right?" "More than I could have imagined. You changed everything. Kate, you took a half-dead man living in the middle of nowhere and reminded him what it meant to be alive." Kate turned and kissed him softly. "We saved each other. That is the real story." Matthew called from the yard then, something about one of the horses, and the quiet moment passed. But as Mitchell rose to see what his son needed, he caught Kate's eye and smiled. These were the moments that made a life, he thought. Not the dramatic rescues or grand gestures, but the everyday accumulation of small joys and shared responsibilities. This was what he had carried Kate 5 miles through the snow to find, though he had not known it at the time. The years flowed onward like a river, each one bringing its own challenges and rewards. The twins grew into rambunctious children who kept the household in a constant state of controlled chaos. Matthew courted and married a rancher's daughter from the next county over, a sensible young woman named Alice, who fit into the family like she had always been there. They built a house on the far side of the ranch and started their own family, giving Mitchell and Kate their first grandchildren. Mary shocked everyone by accepting a teaching position in Topeka, but she returned every summer to help with the ranch and catch up with her family. She never married, claiming she was too busy changing young minds to worry about romance, but Kate suspected her daughter was simply too independent to settle for less than what her parents had found together. The twins, James and Julia, grew into young adults who divided their time between helping run the ranch and pursuing their own interests. James had his father's way with animals and his mother's head for numbers, making him invaluable during shipping season. Julia inherited Kate's love of learning and Mitchell's quiet determination, and she dreamed of becoming a doctor, a lofty goal for a woman, but one her parents supported fully. On their 25th anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. 3 generations filled the house and yard, children running everywhere, adults sitting around the big table Mitchell had built years ago, everyone talking and laughing at once. Mitchell stood on the porch watching it all, feeling the weight of contentment settle over him like a warm blanket. Kate found him there, slipping her hand into his. She was 50 now, her dark hair threaded with silver, her face marked by smile lines and sun. She was still the most beautiful woman Mitchell had ever seen. "Happy anniversary," she said. "Happy anniversary. 25 years. Where did the time go?" Into all of this. Kate gestured at the scene before them, the family they had created, the life they had built. Every moment, every choice, every challenge overcome. It all went into making this. "I would not change a thing. Not even the blizzard?" Mitchell considered this seriously. "Especially not the blizzard. Without it, I never would have found you. You saved my life that night, and you saved mine every day since." They stood together watching the sunset, just as they had done thousands of times before, and Mitchell thought about the journey that had brought them here. The war that had shattered him, the grief that had driven him into isolation, the storm that had brought Kate into his life. Every piece of pain and loss had been necessary to bring them to this moment, to create this family, this love that had sustained them through 2.5 decades of frontier life. "What are you thinking?" Kate asked. "That I am the luckiest man alive, and before you tell me it was not luck, I know. It was choice and work and commitment, but it feels like luck anyway." Kate laughed and pulled him into a kiss that was still as sweet as their first. Behind them, their grandchildren squealed with laughter. Someone started playing a fiddle, and the celebration continued into the evening. But for Mitchell and Kate, standing together on the porch they had built with their own hands, the real celebration was simply this: being together, being alive, being exactly where they were meant to be. The prairie stretched away in all directions, eternal and unchanging. But on this one small piece of it, in a sturdy house filled with love and laughter, two people who had saved each other had built a legacy that would outlast them both. It had started with a collapsing woman in the snow, a cowboy who refused to give up, and 5 miles that changed both their lives forever. And it had become something neither of them could have imagined on that desperate night so long ago: a true home, a genuine love, and a family that would carry their story forward into the future. As night fell and stars began to appear overhead, Mitchell and Kate went inside to join their family. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to cherish, but tonight was for celebrating the past 25 years and looking forward to however many more they would be granted. And somewhere in the barn, descendants of the mayor who had refused to move that long ago night nickered softly to each other, as if remembering their own small part in the story that had brought this family into being. The ranch continued to thrive under the combined management of Mitchell, Kate, and Matthew. By the time Mitchell reached his 60s, he had begun to slow down, though he still rode out most mornings to check on the herds. Kate remained sharp as ever, managing the household accounts and correspondence, while also serving as the ranch's unofficial doctor, having learned a considerable amount about medicine over the years from necessity. The grandchildren adored them both. There were 7 in total now, Matthew and Alice having produced 5 children to go along with Mary's eventual decision to marry and have 2 of her own. The house was never quiet when the family gathered, which was often. Sunday dinners became a tradition, everyone crowding around the extended table, passing food and stories with equal enthusiasm. On one such Sunday, when Mitchell was 68 and Kate 65, the conversation turned to the old days and how the ranch had started. The youngest grandchildren, who had heard the story 100 times but never tired of it, begged Mitchell to tell it again. Tell us about finding grandmother in the snow, little Emma pleaded. Mitchell looked at Kate, saw her nod with a smile, and began the tale one more time. But this time, as he spoke, he realized his grandchildren were old enough to understand not just the events, but their meaning. The thing you need to understand, he said, is that I was not really living before I found your grandmother. I was just existing, going through the motions, hiding from everything that had hurt me. When I saw her lying in that snow, something in me woke up. I remembered what it felt like to care about something beyond just surviving another day. Carrying her those 5 miles through the storm, I was carrying my own second chance at life. Kate reached over and squeezed his hand, and I was running away from my own grief when that stagecoach overturned. I thought I was heading toward a new life in Denver, but really I was just fleeing everything I had lost. When I woke up in your grandfather's cabin, I realized I had been given a rare gift, the chance to truly start over, to build something real with someone who understood loss and survival. The grandchildren listened with wide eyes, perhaps understanding for the first time that the loving, capable people they knew had once been broken and lost. Matthew, sitting at the other end of the table, spoke up. You taught us that family is not just about blood, he said. It is about choosing each other every day, working together, building something that matters. Everything I know about being a husband and father, I learned from watching you two. Mary nodded in agreement. And you showed me that love is not about grand gestures. It is about the small things, the daily acts of kindness and consideration. The way you still hold hands when you walk. The way you look at each other like you are the only two people in the world. Mitchell felt his throat tighten with emotion. This was his real legacy, he realized. Not the thriving ranch or the material success, but these people around this table who had learned to love well because they had been loved well. As the evening wound down and families began to depart, heading to their own homes scattered across the ranch property, Mitchell and Kate found themselves alone on the porch once more. It had become their place, this spot where they watched the sun set and counted their blessings. We did good, did we not? Kate asked softly. We did better than good. We did extraordinary. Who would have thought? That frozen woman in the snow and the lonely cowboy building something like this. Mitchell pulled Kate close, breathing in the familiar scent of her, feeling the solid reality of her presence beside him. They had been married 43 years now, had built a family, a business, a legacy. But more than that, they had built a love that had sustained them through everything life threw their way. I would do it all again, Mitchell said. Every hard day, every challenge, every moment, just to end up here with you. I know, so would I. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell. Inside the house, lamps were being lit. In the barn, horses settled for the night. Across the ranch, in 3 separate houses, their children were putting their own children to bed, probably telling them stories about their grandparents who had found each other in a blizzard. Mitchell thought about the 5 miles he had carried Kate through the storm. At the time, it had seemed like the longest journey of his life, every step a battle against the wind and cold and his own exhaustion. But in retrospect, those 5 miles had been the shortest distance between his old life and his new one, between loneliness and love, between merely surviving and truly living. Thank you, he said suddenly. Kate turned to look at him. For what? For not giving up in that snow, for saying yes when I asked you to stay, for choosing this life, choosing me every day for 43 years, for giving me a family and a purpose and a reason to be grateful I survived the war. Oh, Mitchell. Kate's eyes glistened with tears. Thank you for seeing me when you could have so easily ridden past, for caring enough to carry me to safety, for showing me what real love looks like, for giving me everything I never knew I needed. They kissed then, a soft meeting of lips that held decades of devotion, and it was as sweet as their first kiss had been all those years ago in this same spot. The years continued their inexorable march. Mitchell eventually had to give up riding, his body finally insisting on rest after 7 decades of hard use. Kate's hands grew gnarled with arthritis, but she still managed the household with the same efficiency she always had. They slowed down together, spending more time on the porch, more time simply enjoying each other's company. Matthew ran the ranch now, with his oldest son taking on more responsibility each year. The operation had grown beyond anything Mitchell had imagined in those early days, now one of the largest and most respected ranches in Kansas. But for Mitchell and Kate, the success was not measured in cattle or acres. It was measured in the love that filled their home, in the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who bore their legacy forward. On a warm spring evening, when Mitchell was 76 and Kate 73, they sat on their porch watching another sunset. Mitchell had been feeling poorly lately, his heart not as strong as it once was, but tonight he felt at peace. Kate sat beside him in her chair, her hand in his, and they watched the sky turn gold and crimson and finally purple as stars began to emerge. "Do you remember that first sunset we watched together?" Kate asked. "After the storm, when you told me I would have to stay for a while? I remember every moment of that time. I was so afraid you would leave as soon as the trails cleared. I was afraid you would want me to leave. Never. From the moment I found you, some part of me knew you were meant to stay." They sat in comfortable silence, and Mitchell felt a deep sense of completion. His life had not been easy or simple, but it had been good. It had been full, and it had been shared with this remarkable woman who had changed everything simply by refusing to die in the snow. "I love you, Kate James," he said softly. "I love you too, Mitchell James. Always have, always will." The stars came out fully, brilliant against the darkening sky. In the distance, a coyote called and another answered. The prairie breathed around them, eternal and unchanging. And on the porch of a house built with love and determination, two people who had saved each other held hands and watched the night unfold. Mitchell lived another 2 years, passing peacefully in his sleep at 78. Kate was heartbroken but not destroyed. She had been loved well and had loved well in return, and that sustained her. She lived 7 more years, long enough to see great-great-grandchildren born, long enough to know that everything she and Mitchell had built would continue thriving long after she was gone. When Kate passed at 80, surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Mitchell had created, her last words were about that long-ago blizzard. "Tell them," she whispered to Mary, who held her hand. "Tell them we saved each other. Tell them it was all worth it." And they did tell the story, passing it down through the generations. The tale of the woman who collapsed from exhaustion in the deep snow, and the cowboy who carried her 5 miles to his cabin. How that desperate night had become the foundation of a love that created a family, a ranch, and a legacy that would endure. The house still stands on the Kansas prairie, much expanded and modernized, but still recognizably the same structure Mitchell built with his own hands. The ranch thrives under the management of his great-great-grandchildren, who still run cattle on the same land Mitchell first claimed. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blows just right, you can almost hear the echo of 2 voices on the porch, talking softly about the day, about the future, about the 5 miles that changed everything. It was a love story born from desperation and survival, built on hard work and determination, sustained by choice and commitment. It started with a storm and a rescue, and a cabin in the wilderness. But it became something much more profound, proof that sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us exactly where we need to be, that love can bloom even in the harshest conditions, and that 2 broken people can heal each other if they are brave enough to try. The prairie remembers, the house remembers, and the family remembers, carrying forward the story of Katherine Rose and Mitchell James, the woman who refused to die in the snow and the cowboy who refused to let her. Their love had saved them both, and in doing so, it had created something beautiful that would outlast them by generations. That is how love works when it is true. It does not end with death, but continues forward, rippling outward, touching lives yet to be lived, proving again and again that some things are worth fighting for, worth holding on to through every storm. And if you visit that ranch on a clear night, stand on that porch beneath the stars, you might feel something in the air. Not ghosts exactly, but something more like a blessing. The presence of a love so strong it soaked into the wood and stone, becoming part of the land itself. A reminder that even in the harshest wilderness, even in the worst storms, hope exists, love exists, and sometimes, if you are very lucky, both will find you exactly when you need them most.